The Baltimore Ravens officially franchise tag Justin Madubuike. We talk about what the move means for the Ravens, the specifics, and so much more coming up next on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening in audio form, wherever you get your shows. Thanks so much for tuning in today. You can find us anywhere you want to, whether that is video form or audio form. We bring you 5 days a week of Ravens content, Monday through Friday, plus these bonus instant reaction episodes after games. We do them as well. So a lot of Ravens content over here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bets. It's $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We have a special edition of Locked On Ravens here on this Tuesday afternoon. If you listen to our Tuesday morning episode, we talked about Michael Thomas and Odell Beckham Jr. I said I was going live when the Justin Madubuike decision hit, whether that was the franchise tag or they were able to come to an agreement on an extension. Unfortunately, no extension happened, and the Ravens officially announced about an hour or so ago that the Ravens did place the franchise tag on Justin Madubuike. So we're going to be getting into all of that here, talking about the specifics of the franchise tag itself, what it means, plus how it can maybe impact the Ravens' plans. So planning to talk about also, if you have any questions or comments, you can put that in the chat. These live episodes are really great because I get to interact with the chat more than just on our regular episodes. So that's why I love these, and I love our regular episodes too. But so I see Zach in the chat saying no. I remember, Zach. I remember you wanted Patrick Queen. So Zach wanted Patrick Queen franchise tag. The franchise tag number for inside linebackers was $24 million. Franchise tag number for defensive linemen was $22.1. That's the deal Madubuike ended up getting. So I remember, Zach. We talked about it last time, but Madubuike gets the franchise tag. We got Black Daniel saying locked on and locked in. Appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate it a lot. And then Abby saying he's not going to be happy, which we'll get to. I want to talk about that point, especially a little bit later in the show. But let's first start off with the specifics of the deal. So as I mentioned, it's a 1-year fully guaranteed deal for Madubuike. It's $22.1 million. Now, even though the franchise tag hasn't been signed by Madubuike, now hopefully there'll be an extension before that happens, but that $22.1 million is automatically going to count against the Ravens cap. So it's charged to Baltimore. So Baltimore went from about $12 million, $13 million under the cap. They now are 10 to 11 million, depending on where you look, and some, whether you want to factor in Darius Washington or not. They're about 10 to 11 million dollars over the cap right now. So they are going to have to restructure some guys. I'm sure we're going to see some salary cap casualties in the next week or so before free agency starts. So the Ravens now have to do that because they signed him to a long-term extension. It's a little different, but because the franchise tag has happened, that number is going to impact if there's no long-term extension done by the time free agency starts. Hopefully there is, but I'm not necessarily anticipating it. That's going to impact how Baltimore ends up maneuvering through their offseason. We went through this dance with Lamar Jackson last offseason, right, where the Ravens used the franchise tag on him, and that number was $32 million, and that impacted. The Ravens didn't sign a free agent for 3 weeks, and it was essentially – Nelson Aguilar was their first guy. They brought in Odell, but it hindered how the Ravens were able to operate. So the reason why I was hoping for a long-term extension for the Ravens' sake, and honestly for Madubuike's too, I don't think either party wants this as the long-term solution. Madubuike is a guy that should have a long-term future in Baltimore. The only way this doesn't work is if, there's no possible way Madubuike plays on the franchise tag, and then there's like a tag and trade or something. I don't think that's happening. I think Baltimore secured his 2024 long-term future, but they had to make sure that they kept him in Baltimore, whether that was with the franchise tag or the long-term extension here. But the reason why the tag was not the ideal scenario, and I talked about this on this morning show and have talked about it for a while, so if you're an everydayer, you've heard it before. If you listened this morning, you heard it. It's about the flexibility for the Ravens. for any long-term extension, you can maneuver how those cap hits work. And so if Madubuike signs a 4 or a 5-year deal with Baltimore, which I do expect by the time July 15th rolls around, just for context on that, just because Madubuike signed the franchise tag doesn't mean that this is the be-all, end-all, and Madubuike's playing on the tag. The Ravens and Madubuike have until July 15th to actually work on that long-term extension. So there's not just, okay, franchise tag was applied, that's it. That's not how it works. So hopefully by the time July 15th rolls around, there will be that extension. But to me, not having it done before free agency with that long-term extension, you could have said, okay, well, we're going to make that first year cap hit base salary $2 million or $3 million, maybe even $1 million. You can have that, and it will impact your ability, down the line to sign free agents, but the Ravens need to maximize now, right? I think we all know the Ravens need to maximize right now, their window now, and having Madubuike under that $22.1 million hit is, it's a little disheartening in terms of free agency, but I don't think it will totally make them go out of the sweepstakes for, if you want a Derrick Henry, if you want maybe a cornerback or maybe a wide receiver. I don't think Baltimore stands completely still, but we also have to understand that the Ravens have to re-sign some of their own guys too, and they're definitely going to prioritize that. Now, that doesn't mean I think Patrick Queen is going to come back or Geno Stowe, and I'm pretty sure those guys are on the way out, but this was priority number one. But it's not, the story's not over yet. The situation is not over yet. So I'm interested to see, because I think Madubuike, if it comes down to playing on the franchise tag, I think he will do it. Now, he'll probably hold out or hold in before all that, so probably through training camp and the preseason. But I think come week 1, he would be on the field. But you can take it from Madubuike's perspective too and understand why, okay, this isn't what he wants, but he wants to maximize. Like, I don't blame any player for wanting to get their money, especially a rookie or a rookie contract, a guy coming off of rookie contract. This is Madubuike's first real opportunity at a payday, and boy, did he pick the right time to have a breakout season, right? Madubuike had kind of been figuring it out for the past couple of seasons. We had seen the flashes and the potential, but we hadn't seen him fully put it all together. But credit to him, 13 sacks, was a disruptor, won really hard. Now, I'm not saying he's the perfect defensive lineman. I think for him, the next step is to be, I don't know what you want to call it, like a two-way player in terms of being more consistent. Not that he was bad against the run, but I just say more consistent against the run. But in my opinion, interior pass rush is so hard to find. I'm not saying, write Madubuike a blank check of like $150 million for 5 years, right? The defensive line market is not that. You have guys like Quinnen Williams and Dexter Lawrence, et cetera. But I do think an interesting aspect of this is with Chris Jones, whatever his deal is going to be, maybe Madubuike is waiting on something like that for Chris Jones to sign his deal. Then maybe he's going to try to beat it. Maybe he's going to try to beat Chris Jones's deal. I don't really know how it's going to work. But Madubuike, being as young as he is, coming off of his rookie contract the way that he did, he's going to earn a massive payday, but sometimes these long-term contracts can have little things in them. So people just look at it and say, okay, let's say Madubuike signs a 5-year, $100 million contract just to say it. It's not just that. It goes into guarantees. And are there any clauses? Are there injury clauses? What are some incentives in that deal? So it doesn't just mean, Madubuike signed a 5-year, $100 million contract. That's the be-all, end-all. There are little steps within those negotiations, and sometimes you get hung up on a little step here and a little step there. You might have a general idea of where you want to focus, both the player and the team, but sometimes there's that one little detail that can hold things up, maybe for days, maybe for weeks, maybe for months, and that's just how it works sometimes. And we saw that with Lamar's deal. There were all these reports of little intricacies within that deal. And everybody was saying, well, okay, it's just one little thing, but it actually impacts things in a really big way. But Madubuike, if he plays on the franchise tag, the big thing for him is long-term financial flexibility and long-term financial security, right? That's the thing Madubuike wants, because every year is different. We've talked about this with Mike McDonald and the Ravens coaching staff and even the Ravens roster, how good their free agent class is this year. We're not going to see another team like 2023. That team is 2023 only. They're going to bring back some guys, but they're also going to lose some guys. They're going to bring in free agents. They're going to draft some guys. For Madubuike, not every year is going to be the same. I'm not saying Madubuike is never going to have 13 sacks again or he's going to fall off a cliff. I expect him to be consistently productive for a really long time now. But let's say he gets injured, right? Let's say Madubuike plays on the franchise tag, a 1-year deal, and gets injured, let's say like week 5 or something. Knock on wood, it does not happen. Obviously, I'm not trying to speak anything to existence, trust me. But let's say that happens. his value tanks. That's kind of what we were talking about with J.K. Dobbins, where we know how talented of a player he is, but he was so injury prone. It's not the exact same thing as Madubuike doesn't have that injury history. But if Dobbins had gone on this past year, and had an incredible season, we'd be talking about him as a high value running back. Or what can teams get from him? Did he, shave the whole injury prone thing? Did he toss that aside? For Madubuike, if he gets injured next year playing on the franchise tag, it will tank his value, and he won't get the deal that he would have gotten this offseason. So to me, I don't blame Madubuike for wanting to maximize his payday. I don't blame any. And this is an offseason where Patrick Queen is going to do it. Geno Stone is going to do it. Jadeveon Clowney is going to do it. Kyle Van Noy is going to do it. Ronald Darby, Arthur Millett. I can go on and on with that list. So it's important for these guys, but even more important for guys coming off of their rookie contract to get that payday. So it's going to be interesting how it all plays out, but it's officially that franchise tag 1 year fully guaranteed deal. It's already on the books for 2024, unless an extension is signed, $22.1 million. Coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to be talking a little bit more about what's next for the Ravens now after this Madubuike franchise tagging, who the Ravens could potentially restructure, extend, even cut for salary cap relief. Stay tuned. Plan to talk about here on this episode of Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And when you're looking at, some things, if you had an extra hour to do in a day, what's the first thing you'd do if you had that extra hour in a day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap, read a book, show up for a friend? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special lane in your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. And benefits, there are plenty of them when it comes to therapy, such as learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become this version of yourself, and it's to those who experience major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens live, coming to you from a Tuesday afternoon. Kevin Ostreicher talking with you here still. The Ravens officially franchise tagging defensive lineman Justin Madubuike. 1 year, $22.1 million. Now, again, not the be-all, end-all, as Madubuike and the Ravens still have until July 15th to work out an extension. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in, spending some time on Tuesday afternoon with me. And if you do end up missing one of these live shows, if you're here live with me now, if you end up missing one of the live shows, it's going to be available for replay in video form. Also, we put it out in audio form, which is huge as well. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video. It helps out a ton for me. We've been doing this since 2019. I've been hosting this show. I've not missed an episode. So it's a crazy ride here. You can also follow me over on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at ChaosStriker34. Really trying to pump up the Instagram, so I'd appreciate any support over there as well. Let's keep talking, though, about the Ravens and this Justin Madubuike situation. Now, the Ravens will have options in free agency, but I think it first starts with how are they going to get under the cap, because the Ravens actually do have to get under the cap before free agency starts, and they're going to have to make some moves to do that. Now, the obvious move, and I'm going to pull up their salary cap table as I'm talking here, but for Baltimore, the number one move that people are thinking about is definitely Tyus Bowser, right? Tyus Bowser is the guy that I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what happened with Tyus Bowser. I would love to have some insight into that, but I don't know who does. I sure don't, and I don't think a lot of people do. Bowser missed the year with a knee injury, thought things were going well, but then didn't come back, and then there was stuff about he thought he was good, but the team didn't, or something like that, or the team thought he was good, but he wasn't. I don't know. Crazy situation. Pretty safe to say Bowser is not going to be on the books for the Ravens in 2024. If the Ravens end up releasing him, they will save $5.5 million. So that's already about halfway to where you need to be if you're the Ravens to get under the cap. It just makes sense. Bowser's an awesome player, an even better person, but I don't see where Bowser comes back and what the fit is if there's uncertainty about his health. The situation was really weird. I honestly have not seen anything like it, so I'm not anticipating him being back. You want to look at some other players that could potentially be released for savings. Morgan Moses is one that would also save about $5.5 million. It could be an option. I think Moses actually is on a pretty decent deal, but if the Ravens do need to get desperate there and release Moses, that could be about $5.5 million just as a regular base cut there. The big one everybody's going to talk about, though, is Ronnie Stanley. A regular cut would save the Ravens about $9 million, but if they designate him as a post-June 1 cut, that would save them $15 million. Now, that would be interesting because obviously the Ravens would then have to go and look for his replacement. I think if that were to happen, I'd pretty much lock in Baltimore to take a first-round offensive lineman, first-round offensive tackle more specifically. So I think it could go either way. They could also approach Stanley. I don't think Stanley plays at his current cap number is what I'm trying to say here. Whether that is as a cut and you save the $15 million or part of it, or whether you approach him for a restructure and maybe you get back half of it. So $7.5 million of that $15 million, maybe you get back that money. But I do think Stanley still, he's considering what the left tackle play is throughout the league. I still think he is like a top 15 tackle, but can you justify paying Ronnie Stanley and having Stanley on a cap at $26.1 million? I do think that's a little steep considering the injury history and the inconsistency. Plus, I think to me, at the end of the day, and I've said this before, if you've listened to me for a while, you've listened to me every day, you know this, I don't think you can rotate your tackles and win a Super Bowl. I just don't think it's a viable strategy. I don't think it's a winning strategy. You have to have guys that can play a full complement of snaps. And if Ronnie Stanley can't do that in his career anymore, it's not only, oh, well, you're having Ronnie Stanley on a $26.1 million cap hit and the plays inconsistent. It's he can't play for a full game. If he can't play for a full game anymore, you have to either readjust that contract dramatically or just move on altogether. So that's going to be the big one people are talking about. Patrick McCary would save around $4.3 million. I personally wouldn't make that move. I'd keep McCary on the roster. Patrick Ricard would save $4 million. That's one that's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how they approach that. Ricard had a much bigger role in Todd Monken's offense in year one than I anticipated, but the offense, I bet, is going to look a little different in 2024, so I don't know what role Ricard has to play. I'm sure he will still have one if he's there, but maybe the Ravens just, if they need the money, they have Ben Mason waiting in the wings. Maybe this is the time for them to move on from Ricard and go and promote a guy, I guess, like a Ben Mason. Other than that, you really don't have a lot of options. I mean, you're not going to cut Justice Hill. He's literally your only healthy running back right now. You're not cutting Ben Cleveland. I anticipate him really being in the competition for one of these guard spots. Whether Kevin Zeitler returns, John Simpson returns is not really known yet. So the guys I highlight for cuts, it's Ronnie Stanley, it's Tyus Bowser, Morgan Moses, potentially Patrick McCary, potentially Patrick Ricard, but the last two I don't really think. In terms of restructures, you can maybe restructure a guy like Lamar. You can restructure Marlon Humphrey. Other than that, I mean, I've heard rumblings about Marcus Williams. I don't know how realistic that is in year 3 of that deal. There are plenty of avenues for the Ravens to go out there and make this money. The Ravens are $10 million over the cap right now because of Madubuike's franchise tag, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're just going to have no ways to make this money back. So I do think that there are options and opportunities for them, but I still don't think they're going to be ultra aggressive in free agency. And I think we have to remember how the Ravens like to operate too. I would love it, if the Ravens, if they had the money, they don't really have the money to do it. But if they on the first day, remember a couple years ago when the Patriots and Texans signed like 15 free agents each on the first day of free agency. It was like every move that happened, another move 5 minutes later came out. The Ravens don't operate that way. They operate as they like to let the market develop and play out, and then go and see, did this guy's market maybe not develop the way that he thought? What's a position that maybe isn't getting enough love? For example, like a running back. I personally think the Ravens can wait on a running back because I'm not sure the market's going to develop the way that they want. That's not saying that, the Ravens aren't going to get a Derrick Henry or a Saquon or a Josh Jacobs or whoever, but I still think Baltimore's going to have options even if they just stay back a little bit and wait. Now, it wouldn't be fun, right? It's fun to have, your team go out there and sign guys and just, make a whole day of the first day of free agency. That's coming up on Monday, actually. That's the tampering period when it starts at 12 p.m. But I do think that, again, you have a bunch of options if you are the Ravens. So I'm really excited to see how it plays out for them, but I'm not anticipating just a frenzy on the first day. I'd expect them to be calculated with it like they usually are. It's nothing new. I mean, we can go back a couple of examples here. A couple of years ago, the Ravens waited. They didn't sign anybody on the first day, and then the second day, they went out there and they signed a guy like Marcus Williams, and they signed Morgan Moses, and Darius Smith was also there. So they did that. And then you can even talk about last year. We talked about that in the first part of the show where the Ravens with Lamar on the franchise tag didn't sign a guy for 3 weeks. It was Nelson Aguilar, and everybody lost their mind in the fan base. So this year is going to be really important. What I would maybe say is on the first day, maybe Baltimore re-signs a couple of their own guys, right? Maybe they bring back Ronald Darby or Jadeveon Clowney, and maybe they bring in a free agent from the outside. But I wouldn't expect them to just blow all their money that they end up creating here on that. And coming up in the final part of the show, we're going to be talking a bit more about offseason plans. We'll also get to your comments in the chat as well about how you're feeling about the Ravens and this Justin Madubuike franchise tagging. Stay tuned. We have a lot to get to on this live edition of Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And with FanDuel, you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. $150 if your bet wins. So I'm a big Denver Nuggets fan. I'm a big Nikola Jokic guy. Obviously defending champions here. And you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. So if you want to bet Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, even the Nuggets, they're a pretty safe team to bet right now. They're on a 6-game winning streak coming out of the All-Star break. So you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We are back rounding out Locked On Ravens, our final segment of this Instant Reaction Live edition. Kevin Oshleicher still talking with you here again. Thanks so much for tuning in today, this afternoon, and making Locked On Ravens your first listen, or I guess your second if you listen to this morning's episode of Locked On Ravens listen of the day. So first and second listen of the day here on Locked On Ravens. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and follow along, both in video form and in audio form. It's the same show in video and audio form, so you're not missing out if you want to watch one day and then listen another day. Also, you can find me on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at ChaosStriker34. So let's get into the chat a little bit here as we take the pulse of the fan base, and I'm trying to maneuver my way up here. We have a couple of comments. I see Abdi saying we need to bring in Derrick Henry. I would love Derrick Henry. And my whole argument with the running back situation is, again, you're going to figure out how to get under the cap with Madubuike. But then with the running backs, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs are your top three. It's a very deep running back class, free agency-wise, draft-wise. It's not as good. Not as good at all. But with Henry, if you compare him to a guy like a Jacobs or a Saquon Barkley, those two guys, like we talked about with Madubuike, they're coming off of their rookie contract. And, well, technically not. They both signed like a franchise tag-ish one-year deal with their teams last offseason. But they're looking for their first big long-term security payday from a team. Derrick Henry's been there. He's done that. And I think he's going to prioritize winning a Super Bowl over the money. So if you can get Derrick Henry for anywhere from I don't know, $5 to $7 million per year, look, sign me up. I'd do that 10 times out of 10. So I'm interested to see how they maneuver it. I'm not even sure any of the Ravens running backs that were on their roster last year come back. I truly don't know. It's possible that literally none of them do. You have Gus Edwards. You have a guy like J.K. Dobbins, who, again, the potential's there, but are you going to be able to – I don't even know if Dobbins wants to be back in Baltimore, for being honest. I mean, I think for me, there's a lot of controversy with him in terms of, the injuries, and he's a great player, but can you rely on him for a lot? Again, I don't know what the plan's going to be, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens go and they sign an outside veteran like Derrick Henry, and then they go and – maybe they draft a mid to late round prospect. You have Henry, Justice Hill, mid to late round prospects, and then Keaton Mitchell when he comes back. That to me, I think would be really good. Bruce saying Ravens cannot afford to let Justin Madubuike walk to play on the 22. Oh, I see. Ravens cannot afford to let Justin Madubuike play on the $22 million cap. It's really handicaps EDC's ability at roster building. I mean, yes, ideally the Ravens do agree to an extension with Madubuike because it does hinder the ability of Eric DeCosta and company to build the roster. It's a big salary cap hit. Now, again, the Ravens can free up that money. It's not like they can't afford to have him on that. I agree with you, though, Bruce, in the fact that absolutely best case scenario, the Ravens sign Madubuike to a long-term extension so you can free up that money. And then on top of that, you can have the savings you would get. And that, I think, would allow you to maybe bring in a free agent that not a lot of people would be anticipating. Could you bring in a top-flight wide receiver or a top-flight corner alongside that? The Ravens would kind of be playing the margins and playing the edges if they were to have Madubuike on that tag come free agency. But if they were to sign the extension, that opens up a whole new world of possibilities there. Truth Bearer saying, got to sign Mads and run it back. Got to get that first Lombardi. And saying you can say that about any player playing on the tag. I think he was talking about, long-term financial security there. And also, can they afford Henry now? I think they can afford Henry. I think Henry's contract, the way the running back position is valued right now, or I guess devalued if you want to put it that way, I think there's been a lot of smoke with the Ravens and Derrick Henry for a really long time. And when there is smoke, there is fire. If I had to predict, if I had to feel about, okay, what's my confidence level about any particular free agent coming to Baltimore, I would feel the most confident about Derrick Henry signing with the Ravens. Now, obviously, that's not a guarantee he actually does, but at the same time, there's been so much there, and I think a Barkley or a Jacobs would fit the timeline of Baltimore better, but I just think Henry's a guy that's still a top-flight running back that's going to cost less than a Josh Jacobs or Saquon Barkley, and at this point, I think if you sign the more cost-effective option, I don't think you're necessarily losing a ton in terms of how much better is Saquon than Derrick Henry. Or maybe you think Derrick Henry's better than Saquon, right? And then it works out all the way for you. Or I see Tanya saying the Ravens need to get Henry and cut Stanley. Joey saying Ronnie's got to go. And Nico saying, how's this contract changed the first round? I assume, Nico, you're talking about the franchise tag. Well, with Madubuike, seemingly, right, coming back to Baltimore here, the only way he doesn't is if they tag and trade him, but I don't think that's going to happen. Now, the non-exclusive franchise tag means he can't negotiate with other teams, but I think that, again, this is a Baltimore thing. The Ravens don't need to draft a defensive lineman at all in this draft, in my honest opinion. Maybe they do, but I don't think they do, because their defensive line room with Madubuike right now is Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Travis Jones, and Michael Pierce. You can easily bring back a guy like Brent Urban. You're 5 deep there. I think you should keep 5 defensive linemen, and you're good. You're fine there. I think defensive line is not what I would do. Now, in terms of how it would impact the draft from who the Ravens could re-sign or bring in free agency, in the draft, I still expect Baltimore to either draft an offensive lineman, a cornerback, or a wide receiver in the first round. There is also edges in that conversation as well. For our mock draft Monday, I drafted Chop Robinson in the first round out of Penn State. There are different options, but you don't have to feel as needy now about defensive line with Madubuike, hopefully under contract long-term once that extension ends up getting there as well. Joey's saying the Ravens can't lose Patrick Ricard and Ben Cleveland is ready. Yeah, the Ricard situation is super interesting to me. I don't know what Monken's offense is going to fully look like in 2024 if they want to truly put more emphasis on the pass game. But again, we sat here all last offseason and talked about how Ricard wasn't going to have a role and there was no way they were going to keep him, and fullback in this offense was non-existent. Then they used him a lot. And Todd Monken, something we talked about with him, is he is able to go and utilize his personnel in a really good way, depending on what he has. He can adjust depending on what type of personnel he has. And so he didn't come in and absolutely make Baltimore an air raid offense, right? He still utilized the ground game. The Ravens were a great rushing team. Still crazy. Yeah, they didn't run the ball in the AFC Championship game, but I digress. I think Ricard still has a role, but the role might be a little bit different as well. Brian saying Derrick Henry will be absolutely dominant in our system, I believe. Yeah, I mean, I think so too. Having Lamar and Derrick Henry in the backfield would be incredible. I mean, just thinking about it, I mean, how are you going to stop? Your defenses already have nightmares about stopping Lamar Jackson, and how are they going to stop Lamar? With Derrick Henry there too, it's kind of like yin and yang, like lightning and thunder in a sense. So I think Henry would be awesome. Bruce saying, KO, you really need to pay more attention to Brian McFarland. All right, Bruce, I'll raise you one better. I think I'm going to get Brian to come on the show tomorrow. I think I have Brian locked in to come on the show tomorrow morning. We're going to be talking about the after effects of Madubuike. So Bruce and I are on the same wavelength. We're thinking ahead. So Bruce kind of is doing spoilers on the show tomorrow. But yes, if all things do go well, we'll have Brian McFarland, who is the Ravens salary cap expert, on our 6 a.m. show tomorrow. So if you're interested in that and just the after effects of Madubuike's deal and where they can free up that money a little more from a different perspective, we're going to have Brian on hopefully tomorrow there. And we're just, rolling through the comments here. Let's see. We see a lot of comments about Ronnie Stanley and people not wanting him on the team. Steven's saying, what could we get in a trade for Stanley? I don't think a lot. I mean, I think at that point you're doing it mostly for salary cap relief, and you're probably getting back a conditional 6th or 7th or maybe even a 5th round pick. Maybe a team sees value in Stanley and gives up a day 2 pick. But in my opinion, I don't know at this point what the value is. Teams are going to see that, he couldn't play a full game. The injury, his knee really acted up. I'm sure maybe a team or two will still worry about the ankle injury that he suffered all those years ago. So we're going to see, but I don't think, Steven, a trade is necessarily super plausible for Stanley. I think it's either going to be a restructure or just an all-out cut for him this offseason. I see Zach is still on the PQ train. Look, I'm a big PQ guy. I'd be absolutely ecstatic if you're able to return. I just don't think you can justify paying $2 inside linebackers. I think Queen's going to get probably 80 million plus this offseason. It's just hard because the Ravens now with this Madubuike deal, and you could argue, they could have done it with Queen, but I think Madubuike, the interior pass rush plus Roquan would be a little bit better there as well. And then we see Brandon here saying, I'm concerned about the cost of wasting this offseason on this deal, might have a down year. I think they'll still be able to go and free up the money. But again, as we talked about earlier in the show, it'd be so much better if the Ravens were to get a guy like Madubuike signed long-term, plus you free up that money from Bowser and maybe Stanley, maybe Moses, etc. So you can have even more. So it's not just you're working around the edges and you maybe bring back a couple guys, sign one free agent. We can figure out, okay, now you have all this money from Madubuike that you can pour into maybe a corner or a wide receiver. So we talked about that for sure. And Bruce, I know I kind of fly through things a little bit. I get excited. That's what it is. I get excited. So we're getting excited for the offseason on Locked On Ravens, and we're going to be doing this again. We'll do 5 days a week on here, and we go live after every big piece of Ravens news. So this was obviously a big one. This is what was anticipated. I feel like an extension would have been the best outcome, but at the end of the day, the franchise tag at this point seemed like the most likely one. But to me, at this point, the Ravens, we talked about how important last offseason was for them. This arguably is as important. Now, obviously, Lamar was the big piece there. That was the most important part of everything over these past 2 off seasons. But how do you respond from having the best team in the regular season, not getting the job done? You need to have a great offseason. Eric DeCosta needs to hit on draft picks, hit on those minimum signings or veteran signings. But you got to have salary cap space to do it. Obviously, you can maneuver around the cap in certain ways if your franchise is smart enough to do so, and the Ravens certainly are. They have a lot of guys in that organization, DeCosta included, that understand how it works. But in my opinion, going to be a really important offseason and one that maybe could potentially be defining, especially for a guy like John Harbaugh, who I think this is the do-or-die year for John Harbaugh, in my opinion. But that's a different conversation. We're going to have that conversation a lot on Locked On Ravens. That's all I have to hear today on this live edition of Locked On Ravens, though. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to be right back here again, 6 a.m. tomorrow, talking more Justin Madubuike and more intricacies about what the Ravens can do with him on the franchise tag if an extension is not reached before free agency. So again, be sure to subscribe, follow along audio form, video form, like the video on YouTube. You can also follow along in audio form anywhere you get your podcast. So be sure to do all that. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kashika34. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.